it would be very, very unusual for them to come up with something now unless it's newly discovered.
But it doesn't explain the taxes and the tax evasion here.
Hunter Biden faces virtually no accountability right now. The fact that Donald Trump is facing, I think, kind of trumped up charges on behalf of the Biden Justice Department. So I think this will only increase the appetite to see Hunter Biden face actual justice.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says Hunter Biden's plea deal will not slow down the GOP's investigation of Biden family financial dealings. Today, he'd announced what he called Hunter's sweetheart deal compared to the Justice Department's efforts to put former President Trump in prison. Joining us now to discuss all this is Eric Eggers, Vice President of the Government Accountability Institute and co-host of the Drill Down podcast. Eric, what a day to be in the news, waking up to this news this morning of this plea deal. I will say Republicans think there's so much more there. And if you look back to this federal prosecutor, originally he was also investigating, on top of these charges we know right now, money laundering and foreign lobbying. So how much more is there?
Oh, I think there's quite a bit there, Lindsay. And just because they have copped this, as Speaker McCarthy said, sweetheart deal, doesn't mean that the violations of the law on behalf of Hunter Biden aren't very real. We have, in their own words, by their own admissions from emails we've seen and verified, acknowledgement that they should have registered under the Foreign Agent Registration Act. They were setting up meetings with members of the United States government on behalf of foreign entities. That right there is a violation of that law without registering. They didn't do it. They're guilty. That's just one of the many crimes Hunter Biden has yet to be held truly account for. And it is impossible, Lindsay, to point out that this is happening at the same time while we're in this historically unprecedented moment of having a former president of the United States being charged by the government being run by his political opposition at the time. So it's a wild moment. It is, as you noted, a momentous day. It's also, I think, a very sad day in American history.
It's also precarious that you have John Durham testifying before the House Judiciary Committee today on his investigation into the FBI. I just want to put that note there. But I want to bring up this because you look at Hunter Biden. He came out with this book, pretty much an admission about all these terrible things he did. In it, he says that every 15 minutes, Eric, he was smoking crack. Every 15 minutes. So that can explain some of these things, why maybe you would lie on a federal form about your gun. But it doesn't explain the taxes and the tax evasion here. According to the tax information, apparently he made $1.5 million in 2017 and in 2018. How was he able to make this much money? Where did the money come from?
Well, and that's exactly the question that the members of the Republican House Oversight Committee are digging into. And that's why I think that there's still very much more to come, because I don't think that's all the money. In fact, we know it's not all the money. We've heard whistleblowers from the FBI say that $5 million went to Hunter Biden, $5 million went to Joe Biden as part of a bribe on behalf of Ukrainian oligarchs. We know that $30 million connected to Chinese spy officials have made their way to the Biden family coffers via Hunter and via some of the brothers as well. So I think the fact that at every turn, the Bidens have made every effort to obfuscate and obscure just how much money they're making and the role that Joe Biden plays in these money-making schemes suggests that with the subpoena power that the House Oversight Committee has, that there's more to uncover. But I think that your reference of the drug problem, Lindsay, is incredibly prescient because, I mean, think about this. Donald Trump is currently facing 400 years in prison on 37 different criminal charges. It sounds like instead of a lawyer, if he'd had a drug addiction problem, he might be facing far less penalties. I mean, that's literally what's happening in American justice right now. It's no wonder so many people think we have two different systems of justice.
And you do have the White House coming out saying, you know, we support Hunter Biden as he tries to rebuild his life, trying to frame it in that way. And obviously you want someone to get better if they do have a drug addiction, but they're, to your point, they're trying to pat him on the head almost, it seems like. Let me ask you this as well, because you have Democrats coming out saying that this puts a pin in everything. This is the end. Does this stop the bleeding for a little bit?
Oh, I don't think so. I think, if anything, it will only embolden and enrage conservatives who know what the violations all look like, and the fact that he's now gotten off essentially scot-free. I mean, not facing criminal charges over felonious gun possession because he has to go to a drug diversion program. That's insulting to the people who have faced very real and hard charges over lesser offenses than that. And so I think that, you know, here's the real irony. Think about this. Donald Trump was lampooned as some sort of a third world dictator when crowds would chant, talking about Hillary Clinton, his political opponent in 2016, lock her up. and that was seen to be a bridge too far. Donald Trump actually resisted bringing criminal charges to her once he became president. Unfortunately, Joe Biden can't say the same. So it's, again, impossible to look at the fact that Hunter Biden faces virtually no accountability right now, the fact that Donald Trump is facing, I think, kind of trumped up charges on behalf of the Biden Justice Department. So I think this will only increase the appetite to see Hunter Biden face actual justice on whoever is able to bring those charges to him.
Joining us now to break down the legal case is Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, welcome to the show. It's good to see you this evening. So many Republicans are so mad about this. But I do want to ask you, what does this actually mean for Hunter?
Well, first, one can understand their anger because this is substantially lighter than what would expect. He was facing 5 years in a federal prison for each count of tax evasion. So for him, it's relatively easy. He still has to pay the taxes, of course. It's $1.4 million in taxes, not $1.4 million in unreported income, but $1.4 million taxes on the unreported income. So it's basically 2 years of probation with pretty serious drug monitoring. And if he passes the probation, that is, if he's not caught with drugs in his system and he complies with what the probation people tell him to do, then the charge of lying to the government in order to get a gun will be dismissed. So he's not actually pleading guilty to that. Here's how that works. When you buy a gun everywhere in the union, you have to answer some questions. And one of those questions is, are you a habitual drug user? When he answered that in Delaware, he said no. Then he published an autobiography in which he said he was a habitual drug user. Then the feds caught up with him and said, which is it? So they cut him a beautiful deal on that. It's called pretrial intervention. He doesn't have to admit guilt. He just has to go through the probationary period. If he completes it at the end of the probationary period, the charge of lying to the government is actually dismissed.
So let me ask you this, because something interesting came out today. We had Hunter Biden's lawyer, Chris Clark. He came out with a statement and said, it's my understanding that the 5-year investigation into Hunter is resolved. But then if you look at the statement from the DOJ and David Weiss, who is the U.S. attorney in this case, he actually said this investigation is ongoing. So who do you think is right here, Judge? Because would the DOJ ever let somebody know we're done investigating you?
Well, you're quite correct, Lindsay. There's a principle of law called the entire controversy doctrine, which basically says that issues, whether on the civil side or the criminal side, this is obviously the criminal side, issues between the parties, Hunter Biden and the United States government, must be resolved at one time, in one place, with finality. I mean, you wouldn't want to plead guilty to something if the government was holding back and was able to come after you yet again. It would be very, very unusual for them to come up with something now unless it's newly discovered, unless they honestly didn't know about it when they agreed to this plea deal today. So I think that the government is probably trying to cover its tracks to water down the criticism that is rightly coming at it from Congressman Comer and others, and that Hunter Biden's lawyers are probably correct. This is probably the end of the investigation and prosecutions for him, unless he does some other illegal event after today.
There's a theory out there that the DOJ is saying that this is an ongoing investigation to be able to block House Republicans from subpoenaing these documents or getting these documents. Could there be any truth to that?
Yes, there could, because there is a DOJ rule. We all know this. The FBI cites the rule all the time and has done so in front of Congressman Comer's committee, where they say we are not permitted to share documents with you in an ongoing investigation. Now, that is true. That is a DOJ regulation, which they honor scrupulously. So you're right. That may very well be an excuse. Look, I know people watching this are going to laugh. The government is not supposed to lie. Laugh, because they do. They lie every day. They're not supposed to lie to people they prosecute. They're not supposed to lie to Congress. They're not supposed to lie to the press. They're not supposed to lie to the public. But they do, and they get away with it.